Scripture reading for today is Mark 15:33 through 36. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing near heard this, they said, Listen, he's calling Elijah. Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. The word of God for the people of God.
Can't help but think most of you are thinking, boy, I'm glad I wasn't liturgist today. I have been giving a lot of thought the last few days to a devotion I read in the morning several days ago because it highlighted an area in my own spiritual life and journey, which is an area where I need to grow. I read most mornings a devotion called Jesus Calling, written by Sarah Young. I've been doing that for several years. Several of you I know use that and read that as well. I typically stay with the devotion long enough to feel like I kind of get the goodie out of it, which means it doesn't drive me crazy as much as it did when I first started reading it. But I'm a long way when it at least comes to this. Let me share part of this with you. Make friends with the problems in your life. And she writes later, every problem can teach you something, transforming you little by little into the masterpiece I created you to be. The very same problem can become a stumbling block over which you fall if you react with distrust and defiance. The choice is up to you. And you will have to choose many times each day whether to trust me or to defy me. The best way to befriend your problems is to thank me for them. This simple act opens your mind to the possibility of benefits flowing from your difficulties. I have to confess, I'm not much of a one to give thanks for my problems and my difficulties. I'm sure there's lots of you out there who do a better job of that than I do. I typically am a little bit more of a complainer than a thanker when it comes to the difficulties and problems and adversities that I deal with in life. I'm the kind of person who really loves scriptures like Psalms 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. I am all over that. I love to think about going into a difficult or situation or an adverse situation and know that God is right there with me, that ever-present help that's going to take me right through this. I love the gospel story where Jesus and the disciples are out in the boat and the sea is rough and Jesus calms the storm. I'm all over that story. I love to believe that when life gets rough and the waves are high and the boat is rocking, that I can call out and pray and Jesus is going to calm the storm. I love that. But unfortunately, that's not the way life is all the time, is it? And we do have problems and we do have difficulties and we do have challenges and we do have adversity. And I think Sarah Young is right. How we deal with that, how we face that has a lot to do with how we grow or do not grow spiritually. And if you're anything like me, when I'm in the middle of that, I really struggle saying, God, thank you for this hard thing that's in my life and in my world right now. As a matter of fact, sometimes I really ask the question, why do we need that? Why on your faith journey or my faith journey do I have to have these kind of challenges and problems and adversity? And the answer is pretty easy in some ways. Part of it is because, we all know we live in a broken world, don't we? We all know that we live in a world where there's good and there's evil. All you got to do is watch most of the movies we make or most of the stories we tell, which are chronic or which are almost always the expression of in some way or another good and evil fighting each other. And almost all the time we write those stories so that good wins, because that's what we want and that's what we want to believe. But we do live in a world like that. And so it's just rational, isn't it, to think about the fact that when you or I are trying to do good, when you or I, through our own spiritual journey or our own spiritual walk, hear the call of God upon our lives and try to do that call, try to follow that call, try to be that person, try to promote what is good and right and just in our world, that in some way the world's going to push back. And that's going to come back at us. That's going to come back many times to be a challenge or a difficulty that we're going to face, that we don't want. Dan Glover and a friend of his, Claudia Levy, wrote a book called Deepening Your Effectiveness, and the book is about spiritual stages that people grow through. And it formed a lot of the base of when we developed our disciple formation process called The Trail. Dan and Claudia's book was a foundational piece in terms of understanding that and developing the stages of development that we talk about in that. He used a thing called an ocean diagram, and he talked about 6 stages that most people go through in terms of spiritual development, or that they can go through. And a lot of us stop well before we get to the 6th stage, and there's reasons for that. But he talks about stage 5, and he has a really interesting observation about one of the barriers in the 5th stage of spiritual development that makes it really hard for you and I to stay in that stage or to move beyond that stage. And that is that we misinterpret suffering, that we misinterpret challenges, that we misinterpret adversity in our lives. Let me share just a few sentences of what he writes about that. Here's a familiar scenario talking about this misunderstanding or misinterpreting of suffering. You push past your fears and step out in faith, trusting God to sustain you. You give yourself wholly to the mission of Christ. You get out there and begin doing the work God has called you to do. Then you take a fatal hit. It doesn't matter whether it's the first hit or the 81st hit. The one that will take you out is the one you take personally. And when that happens, what do we do? When we're out there and we're serving and we're giving and we're trying to be obedient, and suddenly somebody cuts our feet out from under us, what's our response to that? What do we do? I think one of our responses to that is, my God, why have you abandoned me? I think at that point, many times we turn to God and we say, I thought we were in this together. I thought you would remember I'm out here doing this because I'm trying to do what you've asked me to do. I'm out here taking this risk. I'm out here doing this because I'm trying to be obedient to what you're calling me to do. I thought you would have my back in this situation. And here's the real issue. I thought I could trust you. But God, you know what it feels like? it feels like you have forgotten me. It feels like you have turned your back on me. And then what happens? We walk away. We turn away. We don't understand where to go at that point. And many times we simply run away wounded and confused, licking our wounds and wondering what went wrong. The reality is, this is one of the oldest stories in the Bible. One of the oldest books in the Old Testament is the book of Job. Many of us are familiar with that story at one level or another. Job, this great guy who goes through all of this terrible stuff and spends about 30 chapters in the Bible warring with God over what's going on, because we don't understand that. We don't understand. We know the world's not fair, but we don't understand it when it's not fair, when it's my life. And we know the world's not just, but we don't understand when it's not just when it comes to me. And there's a statement that sometimes we use that says, no right thing goes unpunished. And we say that because we feel that sometimes. We feel like, all I've done is tried to do the right thing, and now look what's happening. And I don't understand that. And I don't get that. And we never will if there's not two things that we're not willing to do. And the first one is this: to realize that the issue that you're going through, the challenges that you're facing, the adversity that is in front of you as a person of faith is not personal. And you say, how in the world can it not be personal? It's not personal. In the fact that anybody else doing the same thing the same way you are would have the same outcome. It's a little bit like, for a few years when I was a superintendent. As a superintendent, you learned real quick that when you go into a difficult situation and people are upset, they're going to yell at you, but they're not yelling at me. They weren't yelling at Larry. They were yelling at the district superintendent for that district. And you just had the badge on, and you just had to sit there and get yelled at because it wasn't personal. They didn't dislike me as a person. They didn't even know me as a person. They were just upset at an office, and I was in the office. It's the same way with this. When God calls you to step out and do something, and that doesn't go as well as you think it should, you're not the first person who's done that. You're not the first person who's gone through this, and you're not the last either. It's not personal. It's not aimed at you. It's aimed at a person who's willing to do the right thing and bear the consequences of that, regardless of what it is. And it's going to be that way every time. The world will push back. It will always push back. And when you get to a level of discipleship, when you're stepping out, you got to be ready for that. And it's not about you. It's about being obedient. And the other part is this, that there is a truth here, and it's a great truth, and it's a powerful truth. And that is, it will feel like you are alone. It will feel like you are being abandoned. It will feel like God is not there with you. And that's not true. That is not true. That's what it feels like. And this is one of those times when your head is going to have to tell your heart what the truth is. The Bible is filled with verses that tell us that God is faithful. In Deuteronomy, when Moses is talking to Joshua, he goes through this a couple of times, but Deuteronomy 31:6, he says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you." That's the promise we have. It doesn't matter what it feels like. It doesn't matter how alone it feels. It is not alone. And when we get to that situation, we need to go back to these promises over and over and over again and remind ourselves, yes, it feels like I'm alone and it feels like I'm abandoned, but I'm not. God is present. God is here. In 1 Corinthians, the writer says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. And he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. We don't go into these situations without God and without God's presence and without God's promises. We don't face the challenges in our life and the adversities that you and I deal with on a day-to-day basis without that. You know, over the years of ministry that I've been in, I have met so many individuals who are walking through really, really difficult times in their lives and doing it with just unbelievable faith, unbelievable joy, unbelievable peace. And I've been in contact with them over and over again and walked away from those conversations saying, I don't know how they do that. I'm not sure I could do that. I'm not sure I could. And just marveled at where they were in the midst of that. There are many times when we will feel the darkness, and there are many times when we will feel the despair. But the truth is, and Jesus says it in John, you and I are going to have troubles in this world. He just simply comes right out and says it. But then he says, but guess what? I have overcome the world. I have overcome the world. And that's the victory that you and I have. And that's the victory that we can claim. And that's the victory that God shares with us through Jesus Christ. There are going to be dark days in all of our lives. But you're never going to be abandoned. And you're never going to be put in that situation that you can't be victorious at some point in some way. And every challenge offers us the opportunity to grow in our faith and in our understanding and love of God. And so as I end today, the bell choir is going to play a special piece. It's called Triumph. Because in the midst of the darkness, we need to remember and celebrate the light. That the victory has already been won.
If you would please stand as you are able and join us in singing the commitment hymn, number 354, I Surrender All. We will sing verses 1 and 4.